So for instance, an important concept in the ancient world and in the Bible is covenant. And as I've argued, Genesis 1 has the form of a second millennium Hittite treaty, a second millennium covenant. And that makes perfect sense if you consider Mosaic authorship, because Moses was brought up as a prince of Egypt. He had all the education, including a diplomatic education. Interestingly, like Paul later, he had all that education. Festus thought, all that great education has made you mad. But Moses had learned everything he needed to compose the Pentateuch. And Genesis has, and I've argued that in God at Sinai before this book, and subsequently has all the elements of that form. But of course, Moses was led by the Spirit to write that. And so all of these treaties, all these covenants in the Old Testament have the major covenants have that same form. And the form that was used was developed by the Hittites, and the Egyptians used it too. They had treaties with the Hittites. And so Moses used that form. But the point would be this, that even under common grace, God gave the Hittites the grace to articulate this form, which is a very good articulation of a power relationship. And this is just built into our world. I was telling my chiropractor this morning, she asked about this book. I said, if it's true today, if you have a boss, then it's just like the Hittite arrangement. You have a suzerain, you have a boss who's over you. He provides certain good things for you, a workplace, a car, whatever you need, computer. So he gives you those things. That's like the historical prologue of a treaty. He tells you then what you should do. Those are like the stipulations or the laws in the Old Covenant. And you're blessed if you do them. Deuteronomy 28, you have blessings. And you're cursed if you don't do them. So if you do the job well, you may get a pay raise, you may get a raise in position. If you do it poorly, you get a pay cut, you may even be fired. So it's there. It's built into human nature. It's part of our being in God's image. So all of this stuff goes back to God. And I talk about covenants right now up front because that's the huge theme in the whole Bible, of
Yeah,
course.
absolutely. And that's actually something I wanted to touch on because I appreciate that you talked about this in the book. I was always told, I guess, just preaching that I heard growing up, that the Bible is unique in the fact that God makes a covenant with his people, and
Yeah,
that other ancient Near Eastern deities did not do that.
right.
And you show that's not the case. So I guess something that might occur to a lot of listeners and biblical readers is, if that's not the thing that makes the Bible unique, that makes Yahweh unique, what is it about God's covenant with his people that is different, that does set it apart from its ancient Near Eastern counterparts?
That's a great question, and it's a perfect follow-up because the fact is, your things you heard from the pulpit and so on, and you may have read in scholarship, to a certain extent, it's right. Because, and I said this in God at Sinai, the earlier book, the fact is that God never showed up and gave people or kings laws the way he did at the top of Mount Sinai. There was never a theophany, the dark cloud and the thunders and all that, because it never happened. God actually did it with Moses. He was actually God, and these other gods are just whatever they are. But the idea was there, and that's what I'm trying to illustrate in this book, Ancient Near Eastern Themes. The Hittites say that the sun god has established the laws and the contract covenant of the land. The pharaohs say that God gave their god Amon Ra gave them wisdom to do all this. And you find the similar thing with the Hittites and with the Assyrians and Babylonians. A great example that was, I think, electrified the scholarly world when it was discovered, the Hammurabi Law Code, where the sun god Shamash is giving the law to the king Hammurabi. So they had the idea that the gods were the source of law and order and everything else that they had. But the fact is that since those were really no gods at all, they never showed up and did it. But they had the idea that they did it. They claimed that they had it somehow from above. And so that's a refinement. If I were writing this book again, and Craig will ask me to do a second version of it, but I was doing the righteousness and I just didn't want to do it at the time. And I think I made the right choice at the time. But if I were writing this again, I would make that more emphatically the point. But I think that's the explanation. So it happened uniquely in Israel, indeed, because God is really the one and only living God, and He showed up and did things.
If I'm tracking you correctly, what you're saying is we shouldn't be surprised that these other nations had covenants, because the idea of a covenant originated in the Creator Yahweh's mind.
Yeah.
And so the covenant, though, he had with Israel, though, is unique. It's special. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, it goes back to Genesis 1. See, it was their Adam and then his wife were in a covenant. I call her his wife because until the fall had happened, he doesn't name her Eve. So, but that's just my own little, pickiness. But that was built into human nature. He was in a covenant relationship from the beginning, and that idea, however it happened in God's grace, but again, it's built into us, as I used with the job illustration. So it's going to happen. Some people are going to rule over others, and the covenant idea was there. And of course, they had an idea of the divine, and they had an idea that authority comes from above. What Paul wrote in Romans 13: all authority comes from above, which incidentally, he wrote when that Nero was emperor. So, and Peter wrote the same. You fear God and honor the emperor, even though if it's Nero. So, but whatever authority he had from above. And the Romans thought this too, although again, they weren't thinking in terms of the one God. So it's there. Human beings can't escape it. It's just part of our nature. And it's in the ancient world, especially where they're believed more in spiritual things than a lot of people today. They naturally thought, okay, I'm going to have to justify all the things I do. I'm the king. And so I will say it came from above, and maybe they really thought it. And in fact, it was true, although they attributed it to the wrong God.